Awesome, thanks. Hi. Thank you for coming to this panel. We are delighted to be giving it, or the first presentation. My name is Annie Coburn. It's spelled A-N-N-I-E, not A-N-N-E. That's my name, which is Anne. Annie is my nickname. People get confused. I am the Chief Operating Officer of Cosmic Inc., which stands for the Cleveland Open Source Modular Implant Inventors Community. Whoa. And this is Chris Rexroth. And
hello.
We're here to talk about a journey to an open source implantable medical device. There we go. And we are developing the world's first open source implantable device platform and user community.
So the world we work in, you could describe as neuromodulation or neural engineering. And what this subset of neuroscience is looking at using electrical stimulation to alter the function of nervous tissue. That's the big overview, but essentially we're looking at either upregulating or downregulating nerve or muscle activity to bring back a bodily function or reduce an unwanted symptom. The vessel by which we apply this neuromodulation is a medical device. And there is a very wide definition of what a medical device is, which you'll see on this panel today and also through the OSHWA open healthware community. We are talking with specific regard to a Class 3 medical device. Now that classification is coming from the United States of America, Class 3 being the highest risk possible device. Examples of devices like ours are a cardiac pacemaker, external ventilators, cochlear implants, and the device we'll be talking about today.
Essentially, a Class 3 medical device is a device that interacts and intersects with the body. So it's how a human actually touches it, it's implanted in them.
Correct. Some other use cases for these implanted Class 3 devices are using electricity for pain treatment instead of opioids, restoring movement, which is the background of our group. It can also be used for incontinence control. It's now being used for sleep apnea, and there are many other uses. Getting to the point where you have a commercialized product in this space is riddled with barriers. You have a very, very complex regulatory landscape for good reason. You have high development costs. It takes decades and millions of dollars to put out a commercial device. When you are a researcher trying to develop a new therapy in this space and you're trying to use an existing technology, you're going to run into fixed specifications and IP and licensing issues. So how can we get around these barriers? How can we avoid recreating the wheel when trying to make the next medical device? Our goal is to create an open source implantable device platform with the ability to accelerate the development of these new therapies. The whole goal is to get to more clinical therapies to positively affect everyone's health.
To make it easier for researchers to research, essentially.
Mm-hmm. So our group in Cleveland, Ohio, in the United States has been working on what we call an implanted neuroprosthesis, so interacting with the nerve for prosthetic function. And there have been generations of these devices over 40 years. The most recent generation is a modular device implant that received an IDE. We'll talk about this term a bit in this presentation. That's an investigational device exemption, and that is a mid-level of approval at the FDA to be used for first-in-human studies.
So I want to make it clear that that is actually a big deal, is the first-in-human studies. This means that our medical device is a research tool versus an everybody at it, general broad market device. That has implications for how our company is structured.
Mhm. So this device has been implanted now in 10 people in the first trial in which we were using it to restore hand grasp function in people with spinal cord injury. The goal of the NIH, the National Institutes of Health in the United States, was to spread technology like ours to enable more human clinical research tools. The goal of us is to take an existing base system implanted in humans, expand the capabilities of it, and get other people developing using the system. What our base technological system looks like is a set of modules that have different functions and can be daisy chained together to reduce or add back function across the entire body. There's what we call the power module, which is an implanted battery, includes processing and network control to the other modules. Then we can stimulate and record through the other modules. This is a fully implanted system, and we communicate with it externally through a different set of wireless components. Also, in our current funding is developing new modules for other functions. So we're looking to coordinate walking, we're looking to connect with brain-computer interfaces, and we're also looking to reduce pain through nerve block. Once again, the entire goal is to accelerate the development of new therapies and the underlying technologies that supply those to the human. One way we can look at success is the number of IDEs or other research groups that have gotten approval to use this device now for a new indication outside of our original use. So let's make it open source. We put out mechanical designs, we've put out PCB files, we moved from Altium to KiCad to make it easier to interact with. We've put out firmware and software for controlling it. We've cut out certain proprietary software tools that were used to make this more and more accessible to research groups like us. And now that should be it for an open source project. You have the design, you have the software, you should just be able to use it, right?
No.
Our goal is for researchers to be able to use it in humans, not just to use it on their benchtop. So for a medical device, the design is not the full source. So there's this graph in the medical device world. This going left to right is the life cycle of a device going from a benchtop to then translating to human use to then be used in a commercial way. As you see right in the middle, you start to run out of precedents and resources, and you get in this gray area of trying to convince your regulatory body, for us the FDA, that your device is both is shown to be both have efficacy and safety. This is called the Valley of Death.
And it means that we walk through the Valley of Death every day.
Yes. And the goal of Cosmic is to be the bridge over this Valley of Death by providing what? More than just the open source documentation. And what that looks like for a class 3 device like us is there has to be biocompatibility data. Data that shows our device is interacting safely with tissue inside the body. There has to be a way to sterilize the device so that it can be clean and not cause infection in the participant. We've also found that providing documentation of our past regulatory approval from 2014, our IDE, others are able to work off of that to write their own application for an IDE. People in our research world also need the information to include in their grant applications so they can start working with our device. So what that looks like for Cosmic as a whole is a combination of all of the open source documentation surrounding kind of the base system in the middle, the power module, the stimulator, the recording. And then there are a lot of other variables which Anne are going to talk about, but we need to get hardware and other support out to people in addition to the documentation. Our first proof of concept of getting other people an IDE or allowing them to get themselves an IDE is a Dr. Nathan Mikowski, who is also in Cleveland, where we're based out of, and he received a conditional approval for now using the system to coordinate walking. So he'll be controlling muscles through both limbs and the core to help someone with an incomplete spinal cord injury walk and stand again. This was a heavily involved process for them, as well as kind of like the cosmic headquarters for getting them the information that they needed to get this approval. And we'll be releasing some information on that soon. Now Anne's going to talk about all of the other complications outside of that valley of death.
Or maybe complicating that valley of death. Making that valley of death deeper and wider, it's uncertain because it's complicated. Because engineers are wonderful at figuring out the exact nuance of a tree, but you live in a forest. And the forest is made up of many different entities which work on totally different timelines, have many different stakeholders. The approvals process at Case Western Reserve University, which is where the Cosmic Research Group is based, can take 10 different approvers. It will take you months to get paid. That's not a joke. That's not an exaggeration. That is a literal true fact. And so within Case Western Reserve University, using it as an example, you also have the university administrators, you have them intersecting with the government entities. You have the principal investigators who are the researchers who use the cosmic system. You have the research labs who are the people who support or participate in the research. These include staff engineers, postdocs, student interns, other students. You have vendors and suppliers. So somebody like Medtronic is a vendor for Cosmic. There are many other vendors that go into supplying the actual system as it is. And then you have the research study participants, who are the people who are the 10 people who have this system implanted in their bodies. This is a lot of different inputs into a system that makes it kind of so you have this thing, and that is great. And what do you do with it, and how does it move forward? One of the ways that we decided, or was decided, or that we participate in the decision-making every day is the research group, which is about a 40-person group at Case, sort of made Cosmic Inc. exist. Cosmic Inc. is a very small startup. And we are a research services organization, and we are dedicated to making research cheaper and easier for scientists through the use of the cosmic system. The vision behind Cosmic Inc. was founded as a B Corp, a benefits corporation. That ensures that we can be vision first versus profit first. Our plans include, more open source designs, making sure that our supply chain is transparent, making sure that our decisions are supported by our user base, which is the research community, and making sure that those decisions are also informed by open source principles. So everyone involved with this company has had a very steep learning curve in one area or another area, but it's also forced us to be really, really thoughtful as we define what our value proposition is to ourselves and for others. And going from that, finding a corporate structure that's aligned with our goals, with our values, and with what works for us as a team and as individuals. We do not have this figured out totally. I want to be very clear. We are a work in process, but it's an exciting process. The unique nature of knitting together an implantable neuromodulation device with an open source model has had implications for our organizational structure, process, and our business model. Like I said, we are researcher-based, are researcher-focused. That's the market we serve. We are not a mass market device, and we cannot be because we have the we only have the FDA approval that is like an early research study application. So all of this kind of starts with the underlying technology, and that's where we get into how do we do this open source. So Cosmic Inc. licensed the underlying technology from Case Western Reserve University, who holds the patents on this technology that had the ID, the whole thing, the cosmic system, right? You may see in this slide that the research group was awarded the grant in 2022. Cosmic Inc. was founded in 2023. In April, which is when the licensing process begins, and then more than a year later, in July of 2024, the license is signed by Cosmic Inc. That's the group that I represent, Case Western Reserve University, Metro Health, and the Veterans Administration. There's like a lot of different people at play here. So now, today, we are continuing to work through what sub-licensing means for Cosmic's Inc. liability as the holder of the underlying license. Like what happens to us if anybody using the Cosmic Inc. open source license screws up, how does that flow towards us? How do we respond to that? Is it an acceptable risk? And then we are also working on things like patent abandonment, trademarking, and other intellectual property issues. One of the things that I said as part of this was that the length of time it took to get the license out of Case and Metro Health is a use case for the necessity of Cosmic Inc. in and of itself as a way to make research go faster and not slower. And Kevin Kilgore, who is the principal investigator behind the Cosmic system, said if every possible institution that wanted to use the NNP system had to go to Case, no one would ever use it. So there needed to be a translational entity, and that's us. Our sublicenses include hardware, the CERN license, the MIT license, and Creative Commons, because there's hardware, software, firmware, and documentation. And this really did take 23 drafts. 23 drafts later, and we are into the land of marketing research. So there are lots and lots of questions that we face. One of our core values as a company and as people are to go in with a really user-centered design approach to problem solving, which means asking people what they actually want and need. It means talking to people. It means listening to people. And it means examining how we're moving. Is that aligned with what this particular user base wants, needs? How do we show that we are a trustworthy and trusted entity? And then how do we afford to make a service or a product based on what those researchers need? Because grant timelines are long and we still need to eat. And so what's next is we pretty much come up with the base philosophy is that if we're going to do it, it's got to make sense with everything else we're doing. And so we're going to use that as a rubric for our plans moving forward. Like we want to offer products to researchers, for example, a benchtop evaluation kit. Does that make sense? Yes. Is it cost effective? Yes. Do we, for example, want to offer an AI-enabled home assistive tech device? Sure. But is it in line with what everything else, is it in line with what we're doing? So maybe we shouldn't pursue that. Maybe we should continue to pursue this really exciting research to continue to go down that path. And we've come a long, long way, and we've still got a ways to go, and I'm really proud of us. And here's our future services, which are to distribute the device, and to serve as a consulting resource for people using it, to offer services that are really hard to like do yourself. For example, biocompatibility and sterilization testing. It's like, well, if you manufacture this yourself from the open source plans, you're gonna need to access a whole other host of services, which is a complication, but it is actually, true.
Mm-hmm.
So, and thank you.
Mm-hmm. We're excited to engage in the panel. I don't know who wants to go next, but the Google slides are ready. And we'll throw this up.
For anybody who wants to go next. Okay. Awesome. I'm just going to mute it while you put it on, okay?
Hello. Got it. So hi, I'm Scott Smith from Open Water, and we are a company that is dedicated to pursuing and developing open source medical devices, and that's a quest that we're at. I don't think we cannot officially say that we have medical devices yet. We have scientific instruments, and we are on our way to making those devices. Just like Ann and Chris mentioned, we have to overcome the regulatory part of that. So we have two devices. We have a device called Open Motion, which is a instrument that measures blood flow non-invasively, and then Open LIFU, which is a low intensity focused ultrasound system. And both of these are designed to be modular and open source. So I'll talk a bit about the devices, but I'd like to start with why our company came to existence. So, healthcare access is different across the globe. It's correlated very highly with the size of the economy. And, but even with big economies, we find that it's becoming more expensive, the cost of healthcare. In the US, it's the #1 cause of bankruptcy. And it's also, the system is designed to be kind of anti-innovation. The course for getting a new device to market sometimes can take 20 to 40 years to do the research, do the clinical trials, develop the devices, and get them to market. There are several hurdles. The FDA needs a lot of data to do this. And it seems that only the bigger companies, the big pharma companies, and the bigger device companies, the Medtronics of the world, they can afford to kind of ride this out. But for smaller startups, it really stifles innovation. So we have set out to kind of change that goal. So we've committed to being open source always. Our software is AGPL licensed, and all of the hardware is under a Creative Commons license. We do have patents, but we've made a pledge to share all of those. So we give them people unfettered access to use our patents. And in addition, all the other information, we want to share our clinical data as much as we can to make it easier for people to use the devices as a platform to do different things with them, because they're both very flexible devices. And kind of to underscore what Chris and Ann said, you know, it's not a medical device until it has that approval, either a CE MDD or a FDA approval or Health Canada. Until then, it's just it's an instrument. And so GLIA has a great example of this. You know, a stethoscope. Everybody has benefited from this for a long time, but if you make a stethoscope and you don't have approvals, then it really can't be used by a doctor, right? So even a simple device needs these approvals to become a medical device. And you know, the cost of deploying a medical device is very high. These devices are often complex, and they require a lot of prototyping, testing, and then refinement. And then once you get the device set, you need to then have a clinical trial to ensure it's safe and that it's accurate. And you have to do these clinical trials to get the regulatory approval, especially if there's not a predicate device to go along with it. You know, if you have to go the de novo route, it can be extremely expensive. And there are requirements in each country for regulatory that have to be followed, different pathways depending on the device. Is it a class 3, a class 2 device? All these things have to be factored in. And it's very interesting that 80% of the cost of getting a new device to market has to do with the clinical trials. I remember reading, you know, there's a company called NeuroPace, and they spent over $80 million to do their clinical studies. And so it's very expensive, and that also impacts the cost of the device and getting that treatment to people who really need it. So I wanted to stop and talk about our founder just for a second, because I think she has done a lot to change the model on how we're pursuing getting devices to market. So Dr. Jepson is our chairman and founder. She came out of industry. So she's had key positions at Google and Intel and Facebook and Oculus. And so she has been very successful in that. She also started the One Laptop Per Child project and used all of her background in industry to get a lot of laptops out to children. So over 100 million kids were impacted by this project. And, you know, one of the things that I didn't mention on the previous slide is that with all her accomplishments, she's a brain cancer survivor and has struggled quite a bit with getting treatment herself. And she, I think, was motivated by this experience to do something with open water that was different and enabled more people to have access to treatments. And she's very passionate about this. So again, the biggest cost of getting a device to market are the clinical trials. So how do we make that easier? Well, she learned during her time in industry about, you know, the impact of Moore's law. So if you look at things that have grown in expense, right? Hospital services are at the top of the list. This is data from 2000 to 2021 that shows how inflation has impacted that. But conversely, if you look at you know, consumer electronics, you can see how the price has been driven down. And so she wanted to take that same impact and apply it to medical devices. So another example is the smartphone. I mean, if you look at the smartphone versus, say, a pharma treatment, right? They both cost billions to develop. They both are very expensive, but but the smartphone platform has tech that keeps getting cheaper and cheaper and more accessible to all, whereas the pharma treatment has got a single indication and a very high cost. So, you know, with the smartphone, improvements are very fast, and now the price is down below $1,000 per unit, whereas the pharma solution is super expensive still. So what we have done is we have worked on doing design for manufacturing to drive the cost of our devices down before we did the clinical trial step. So that means that we have implemented a ISO 13485 system. So everything that we've done is documented just like a medical device company would. And the idea would be to have the same system that the trials are going to be conducted under to be available to all, open source. And you wouldn't need to redo the device, which is what many medical companies do once they've done the clinical trials. And then they have to get that approved again. So this is our approach. So we, instead of taking all of this time and money to do one device, we have tried to make our devices a platform so that they can tackle many different applications. And so instead of having a clinical trial centered on one device, we'd like to have many clinical trials that can share some safety data. Some of the efficacy data are transferable across the studies. So instead of taking 3 years and 19 million for one project, we can do that across hundreds of different applications. So, you know, showing how open source has grown so fast, it really now, I think, has powered innovation in a way that we haven't seen before. My background's in neuroscience, and you know, if you follow how open science, open source has impacted neuroscience, it's pretty incredible. So there's some projects that most of you in Europe are probably familiar with, the NeuroPixels project, and the Allen Institute in the States has embraced open science, and it's really changed how research is done and who can do that research and who can afford to do that research. And there's some great companies, even one from Edinburgh, Pi-EEG, right here at the university. And it's really changed the landscape of neuroscience. And we hope to do the same thing for medical devices. And we're not the only ones. We're, I think, in a great crowd of co-developers, and it's a very exciting time in this field. So just a quick overview of the two devices that we have right now. So Open Motion is a pulse speckle contrast device that is non-invasive, and we have developed everything, including some of the components that we had to design ourselves. The laser is one of these, but we've got all the components right now. You can go to our GitHub and see the designs. And basically, it gives you an output from 16 cameras over the 2 sensors that shows the hemodynamics. And we have used a CMOS camera on this to drive the cost down instead of using the single photon sensors, which are much more expensive right now. And that could change in the future if those sensors come down to a different price level. But basically, the laser enters the brain, goes through the skull, and then the light spreads through the tissues. And then we measure that on the CMOS camera so you can see the scattering. And then as the red blood cells flow through, that causes even more disruption, which is basically, it's a very simple device, which hopefully has multiple applications. So to differ it from laser speckle imaging, which would be on the surface like a pulse oximeter, and then these more expensive devices, diffuse correlation spectroscopy devices, which can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars currently. to our device, which is a $10,000 device right now. And we hope that when we scale our manufacturing, that cost will go down even further. So we've done some initial steps to validate the devices. We did just a validation study, and then we did a study on stroke patients and showed that we're as effective in detecting large vessel occlusion as a transcranial Doppler, but we don't need a trained operator. So this could be deployed in the ambulance, for example. And and it's designed to be modular. It doesn't have to be used on the head. You could image extremities as well. So yesterday I was fortunate enough to meet with a group that wants to do a study with the Scottish Ambulance Service that, looking at, they have these mobile stroke units that have a CT in them, and they cost over $1 million. And, my question to you is, which has a larger return on investment? You could have one of these devices in every ambulance for the cost of one of these. So that's our goal. We want to get our devices out to do good. And there are plenty of other applications that are waiting for this technology as well. We just are looking for partners to come along and use our platform and do the research. The open focused ultrasound is also developed. We have the ability to daisy change the transducers, up to 6 of them. And it could be head worn or body worn. And it has applications in neuromodulation and oncology, microclot with long COVID or diabetes. We just published a paper on using it to treat depression, wound care, or you name it. It really is a device that can be used for a lot of different things. And we've made the transducers to be steerable. So instead of having to manually move the transducer around, they can be steered electronically. So we can very accurately target the area that we want to stimulate. And we've done work in oncology with organoids, being able to use just the sound, not any other added treatment to destroy the cells in organoids. And then we actually had replicated that in an animal study. It's still preliminary. We haven't done a human trial on this yet, but it's coming. And we have looked at the effects of long COVID with microclotting and being able to use the focused ultrasound to break up the microclots. We just published this paper using a lab on a chip model, and again, are moving towards trials for that. And as I mentioned, the depression study, we have a pretty innovative way of using an Android app to do photogrammetry, to do the targeting, so you don't have to, have it in the MR to do the targeting. And we've tried to make it as accessible and easy to use for research groups doing a wide variety of applications. So we can have different holders for the different number of transducers. And the nice thing is it's open source. So if we don't have a holder that fits your project, you can print your own. So here are the different components for that. This is the inside of the transducer under the driving electronics picture there, and then showing the photogrammetry targeting system. And so where are we now? We are to the point where we want to move from being an instrument to a medical device. And so we are looking for people to partner with our platform with their research projects or an entrepreneurial application of it. And you can buy the units from us pre-assembled and use our open source code, or you can 3D print your own and buy the components and build your own. We truly do want to be an open source company, and very interested to talk with the panel on getting open source certification. It's something that we want to do. These are just some of our research partners that we've worked with up to date. And we'd love to have you be part of the community, and you can check out our GitHub or join our Discord to get more involved. Thank you very much.
Hi. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. Thank you very much. First of all, thanks to the organizers. Thanks all you wonderful people. It's really always refreshing to be in a meeting where the focus is on collaboration. So that's super nice. Really, thank you for that. Very nice talk so far. I'd like to talk about magnetic resonance imaging and our road to open source it. I was asked to introduce myself. It always is a little bit more difficult because it's a fantastic team of human beings behind, so I'm just representing that. But just to give you a little bit of background to myself, so I'm an electrical engineer. Then I did my PhD in ultra high field magnetic resonance imaging already some 11 years ago, and since then a lot of different research projects. SPI and project coordinator, and recently also we founded a non-profit organization which I'm the current chair of. So that's this open source imaging initiative. Okay, so coming back to MRI. First of all, why portable low field MRI? So this is the device that we are building, and just to give you an update on where we are at the moment. So we have this very expensive machines. So this is a standard in the clinics, and depending on the configuration, can be even more expensive than that. But let's say 2 to 15 million for 10 years. Yeah, it uses very high and very homogeneous magnetic fields. You need to have superconductors for that. That's why it's also so expensive. One of the reasons. It has high quality and strong image contrast. It's whole body, stationary, requires special facilities and training, and a very high cost, both installation and maintenance. It's a beautiful technique. It's a beautiful technology. It's still untapped what it can really do. So innovation potential is huge, but again, access is very limited. And I think the map that Scott has shown, this is also true for MRI. So there are basically many regions which is completely uninvented yet, this technology. And then we have our very low cost machines, or our low field devices, which you can see here. And we have a target cost of below 100K, and with over this 10 years. So 10 years is a typical time such a machine is in operation. And 100K is not the material cost, but it's really something we believe that can be done also for a market price, or basically a cost for a hospital. So that's where we want to get to. So it's very low cost. It's a little bit more specific because in this case we have head and extremities imaging, so it's much smaller, as you can see. It's simpler in maintenance. It can be easily transported for use in remote locations. It's safer for patients and has less contraindications, especially when you think about implants, for example. For different reasons, we can talk about this later. And then it can be powered from a standard wall socket. So I don't need superconductors, and I don't need a lot of other things. So this is pretty relaxed. But I also have a lower signal to noise ratio, and that's also lower image quality. But let's see what we can do with that. Good. Now, this is basically inspired a little bit by Andy's presentation, just to show a lot of images and show you in one slide how to build a low field MRI. So basically, you start off with a magnet. You have a lot of individual magnets. You put them in this one, you stack them in these rings, then you need to measure the field. You need to homogenize it. So you need to have your algorithms ready. Then you 3D print some shim inserts, how we call them. You remeasure, you re-put some shim inserts, you get a homogeneous enough field. When you're done with that, you go to your gradient calls because you need them for spatially encoding your signal. So you can use open source software for that. You can do some 3D prints where you put in the wire patterns in there. And then you basically have 3 channels of these that you put into the magnet. Once you have that, you can do the same thing with the RF coils. The software is not yet open source, at least this one is not. But anyway, you do basically the same thing. So RF in this particular case at 2 megahertz. And then you have some a tuning matching network and even an open source connector, which is nice. And then you have your signal to excite your proton spins inside the body. Now you need to put pulses into that. So I need my gradient pulses, I need my RF pulses, I need to digitize my receive signal at some point. So I need a console that does all of this. Then I need to have stronger signals in the output. So for the gradients, I need to have high currents. So I have a gradient amplifier. And for RF, I need to have high peak amplitudes. So I have my RF power amplifier. Good. So this is how you do an MRI system. You put it all together and then, I forgot the TR switch. Of course, because this is quite a high peak power and you have very low MR signals. You don't want to destroy anything. And then you have some low noise preamplifiers in there. Good. Put it all together in the box. This is how our OC1 system looks like. This is the version 1. And I mentioned already had an extremities resolution topic of debate because you can run different sequences, which gives you different resolution, but let's say 1.5 by 1.5 millimeter you can achieve. And the material cost, depending on the configuration, you're at around 30K, which is quite nice. And the construction is of relatively low-cost machines. It's a portable system, so you're at around 150 kilograms for this one here. Field strength 50 millitesla. So basically, yeah, pretty safe to use, really. And the stray field is also very low, so you can operate it close to other devices. And it's open source. Good. Now, when you have that, so this was the hardware part, of course, on the software side, you need to do something similar. And I don't want to go into details like all these blogs, how it works, but basically the main message is that to drive these gradient pulses and these RF pulses, we have different imaging techniques and they give different contrasts. And for that, you have what we call pulse sequences. And there's also an open source software for that. So basically, these techniques are also exchangeable between groups once you have that. So in the input, you have an open source tool. And at the output, the data that you receive, you also have it saved in an open data format, because then you can plug it into the image reconstruction pipeline, which there are also open source tools. So you can see that basically what we're trying to do is having really the whole chain of hardware, but also from the image processing pipeline to image reconstruction, image post-processing, etc., that it's all accessible. When you have that, you can run some first imaging experiments. Then you start with some simple testing objects, but that's important because you also have to have a quality control somehow, that if someone reproduces it, you get similar results and you can somehow evaluate, did I do a good job? Is my SNR how it should look like? Or if I exchange components, because it's a very modular approach, how we try to set it up, that you maybe exchange your amplifier, RF coil, or whatever, what's the difference between my results? So you have this type of phantoms, you again, a lot of 3D printing, you have a Lego type way of putting it into the RF coil, and then you have a very well-defined coordinate system, and then you get the first image out of it, which looks like this, and then there are some automated routines that you basically can extract some features. Now, next step is when you have that, and of course you can also do some in vivo images. So here are some first images. There's still no post-processing in there. So this is in vivo human head, and then different slices. As you can see here, it's a 2 by 2 millimeter resolution. and a scan duration 6 minutes in this particular case. And you can see that there's maybe not that well on the screen, but there's already some, you can imagine that even though the SNR is lower, that there is some diagnostic information that you could use. So the idea is not, we will not be able to replace the big MR system with this little little low field MR system, just based on physics. But there is a lot of information in there that can be used clinically. Of course, you can go the next step. Yeah, so you have some, this is basically like similar to the image you saw before. Yeah, there's a lot of noise if you really look into in the details. And then you can take this data and use some more fancy deep learning based image reconstructions, and then it suddenly looks like that. And that's, in this case, there's no cheating here because we didn't train on some high resolution, high field MR data, but this is really just some, there are physical models behind. So it's just some denoising and some other corrections. So you get really nice results, and you can imagine that, yeah, probably there's a lot of information that I can use to diagnose patients, or, for example, to have as a reference technique for other devices. If it's low cost enough, it can be used. Okay, and then of course you can apply it to the whole data set. So here just an example of the data that you saw before, but of course over the whole set of brain slices. Good. Of course we cannot stop there. Okay, in Germany you have this very famous advertising for chocolate, which is quadratically practically good. It only works in Germany, by the way. So even though we could say, yeah, that's quite practical and quadratical and has good images, but of course we cannot stop. Also at this stage, we need to go into a more fancy looking, complying with standards clinical design, because we want to push this project to the clinic. We want to stop at the research level, basically. So there was a fun process actually to work with a designer and a lot of sketches, etc. We had some clinical people involved, from professors, technicians, medical doctors, and there was also a nice, I don't know if it's visible, but the designer made even some VR model that you could have a look, and then there was a little 3D printed one that we could check the dimensions, etc., if it would fit. So there's a first design made, which we then also built. It's not perfect, so we still need to iterate a bit, but you can get the idea. Yeah. So this starts to look a little bit more like, okay, this I would actually put into the clinic, and actually this goal is also to go to stroke and to go into intensive care units, because you can push the scanner to the patient instead of the patient going to the scanner, which has a lot of advantages. All right. So there's some concept. You can see some here how could look like. There's this video is not. Oh yeah, it's playing. There's also from the user interface. There are some first concept studies, and that's all, of course, work in progress. But slowly but surely we're getting there. So that's quite nice. Okay, and then previous speakers said it already, so it's not enough to have the technology under control, but you also need the documentation. So I'm working for the, should have said that actually in the introduction, so for a German National Metrology Institute, so basically for the government. So I'm not working for a company. Yeah, so we're not doing, we are not a producer. That's why we cannot certify this device, or no, it's impossible with our bureaucracy. But what we can do, and what we're doing within our projects, is, and here we work together with a notified body, which is the Czech National Metrology Institute that recently got accredited as a notified body, to provide documentation, technical documentation for the system, that will be also released and shared. So again, it's about lowering this hurdle to make it as easy as possible to transition this technical innovation device into the clinic. So we can provide some documentation and some intended use, risk analysis, applicable standards, maybe some testing procedures, etc. We cannot do post-market stuff, but we can give a lot, and there are no blueprints for that. So that's quite exciting that we can do that also within this project. Okay, and then we have, once we are there, that's at least for us, we can go in vivo, not as a diagnostic device, but still as a research device, something similar like the IDE. We have already clinical partners. So here is, for example, the Open Lab MedTech in Hamburg, which we also started to establish, and actually in 2023, and they liked it, so it got extended. And before even putting the MRI there, it's basically a common space for clinical people to meet and to get the idea a little bit of what open source can do and how it can help them. And for example, some of the projects, so it's either for training, you can see this Glia stethoscope, for example, but also other things that help them to accelerate or to reduce the surgery time, because, for example, they can 3D print these parts, pre-bend the implant, and don't need to do it while the patient is on the table. So there's some real benefit to that. Okay, and this is the worst slide of this, but this is the best I could do yesterday evening. But I really want to somehow transmit this, because that's a bit the master plan, how we think this can benefit us, patients, and our whole community. Okay, so you start as a researcher, developer, you make a technology, which we did. So everything that's blue, it's already done. Then typically after that, you start to do some documentation. This always lags a little bit behind. This works well. So we now have the systems. There are a lot of groups that are actually reproducing that, which is nice, because in a couple of years, you have a large user base that will feed into that. But then we realized, okay, this scaling part is really difficult. So we need something, and there are a lot of egos, everyone wants to innovate, and how do we keep it still as similar systems that we can evaluate and compare, etc. So we need a communication infrastructure. For that, we have now the non-profit organization that we founded. So this helps the researchers directly or improve the technical documentation and has some communication space, provides tools. We launched a conformity assessment body to actually rate how open source the projects are, because the idea is to, at some point, when we go to medical devices, we basically want to motivate them in a nice way to increase the level of documentation, because we will need it at some point, and then it can feed into this concept of lower the hurdle as much as possible. Yeah, so not only the research paper, but really make it properly. And here we started to team up with journals. There's a special issue on how to build open source scanner in a journal, which is fantastic. But then we can try to get this into the journals, into this mindset that if you write open source in your paper, it has to have a clear definition. Is it open source? And then how open source is it? Yeah, so it should be a transparent process, and that's what we're trying to do. Then, of course, this also, you can include, once you have the documentation, you can also include students and medical professionals that can actually feed into the technology. So that's all great, but we are still not here at the patient level. So what's the next step? This is also what happened already. So some of the technology is being used by companies for their products. Some companies also got founded out of this project. So in a couple of years, hopefully there will be some approved devices. So this is nice. That will benefit patients. But again, more to that, lower the hurdle, notified bodies, which work with us to do this MDR part. No blueprints yet. We will hopefully have them. And then have also some testing of this device, because if we have that, then we can make these lines here again. Fantastic. So one is the researchers, developers. Then they can do the application with their ethical committees to go in vivo. And what happens then? Oh, now they generate some data, and we can make an open imaging database, which can be used to train, for example, deep learning stuff, blah, blah. And of course, everything goes to the companies. Now, you noticed a little bit, I sneaked in our logo here. Of course, we're not a company, but one worry that I have still is, I mean, all these arrows are pointing in this direction, and it's difficult to get it back. Yeah, so basically from this side back into the community. Yeah, so that's also one reason why we're also thinking at the moment to transition this project and this technology into a startup, that we can try to keep as much as open source as possible to be able to explore this and feed this back. Yeah, and then the circle closes, and then there are a lot of other arrows, and then we reach the pot of gold, okay? And you know what the pot of gold is behind the rainbow? Public healthcare system, okay? So it's all about resources. I mean, it's amazing what you all guys are doing with very little money, but the reality is what all the others are doing with a lot of cash, it's just out of scope. Yeah, so what are our ways to what is our lever? And there are small businesses in open source hardware, yes, but to be fair, there are no good arguments for most of the projects to have it open source. But the public healthcare system and the public healthcare systems globally, they could have these arguments. Yeah, so on different levels. So if we can get there, but for that we need examples. Yeah, so if we get an MRI there, maybe we get an ultrasound, maybe we have an implant. We get maybe to tap that, and then of course this benefits our whole open source hardware community, because we have investment in the whole infrastructure and all the tools we need, etc., etc. Yeah, so that's the master plan. All right, here are some resources. Have a look. I'm happy if some of you guys want to support us as active members. We just got founded, so it's trying to get it rolling. And yeah, some of the projects that we currently are financed through. And yeah, here's some acknowledgements. And then while the next speaker is coming, just experience from the build of one of these systems in Cape Town by December last year. Thank you.
It's two things.
You can do it.
Can you hear me? Hello, everybody. My name is Rohit. I'm a designer, engineer. I'm originally from India, but I live in Spain now, where I have my own practice of building things, more or less. So what brings me over here is to present this project, which I have around how can you take small things from clinics and put it in a bunch of design methods and fast, rapid prototyping and go to community. And one of the only ways which I have found to do this is using open source. And so what I'll be walking us all through is a process which I found to understand and create small things for kids with with disabilities and change the way they go through therapies or rehabilitations. And so the reason I did this is because I grew up in a household where we have people suffering from cerebral palsy, and I could watch them suffer when they go to therapy, they go to clinics, and the process is very, very, very mechanical. And because the clinical mindset to treat somebody with cerebral palsy is similar to treat somebody with stroke, but the brain level is not the same. So a stroke patient has lived his life or his or her life, and he knows some cognitive patterns. So the process is to rebuild them. But in the case of cerebral palsy, it's usually a birth or a birth defect, or it comes from the way somebody was born. So those kids don't have those level of cognitive things, and they are designed to play, and hence their therapies are very boring. And so my whole project is around making those therapies which are boring into something that sounds like this. And like toys, building toys for kids, but in a special way. So the process is like this. I just wrote it down, but it's a simple process. So you establish very, very, very clear intervention goals, because that will define whether you scope the project or not very well. And you have to go through a regulatory body, which I think a lot of the previous panelists are kind of battling with. And then the second part is, as a designer, we have to understand the condition, the mindset, the empathy part of the patient or the child who is suffering from this. And since these are in some way medical devices or like medically used toys, we have to specifically work with experts in this domain. So the process is very in a co-design methodology. So you work with them, iterate with them, and they also give very crazy feedback, because they give feedback from their point of view, but and you can only implement certain part of it. And so it's a very fun process. Everybody learns, and you create a lot of things. And then the whole point of is to take all of these things out, test, and then create cool toys for kids. And in the end, once you have something that is works like, you should always open source it, because of the reasons which I will tell in the presentation. So we start with defining very, very, very clear goals over here. Like the device that we will be, this is an example. So like the example which led me to design this thing, but I'm sure a lot of us can learn some things or get inspired from something and do things for kids in your community. So in my case, I wanted to have something that is very useful in therapy centers and homes, because that are the places where I have access to, and I can intervene, I can distribute in those places. And it needs to improve the playfulness of any existing therapy. And this therapy should be clinically validated to work in kids of which I am working for. It should be as low tech as possible, because of the level of motor maturity these kids have. These things will break very, very often. They will fall down, they will be juggling everywhere. And so these things have to be very low tech, very easy to make, and essentially open source. So it's very easy to change them, make some repairs very easily. And it should positively affect social participation, because the reason kids suffer is not only because of the physical impairment, it's also because that leads to social exclusion. So because they cannot hang out in regular playing grounds, they cannot hang out in regular spaces, so that creates a lot of exclusion, but that is not intentional. So my aim is also to increase that kind of social participation, and it has to be very, very, very affordable. So you can see the price points over here are like very cheap. And so let's do a very small deep dive into what is cerebral palsy. Does anybody know over here what is cerebral palsy? So I think a few people know about what cerebral palsy is. So the key aspects of cerebral palsy is like, it is a permanent disorder. So it is not something that you can be cured of. You can just learn how to manage it, which affects movement and posture. It is non-progressive, which means that it will not deteriorate over time. So it's like once you have it, you will probably be in the same state, but the deterioration does not happen because of the condition, it happens because of the way the body grows. And the reason it occurs is because of some disturbances that happen during developing of the fetal brain. And in the case of my family, that was because of premature birth, but there can be several other cases as well. And so there is an important thing about muscle tone with these kids, and I have a very interesting example. So there are three kinds of muscle tone, which is like hypertonic, hypotonic, and mixed. So the main problem or the main condition is that, for example, if I have to pick up this nice calculator over here, my eyes see the calculator, they locate it, and my brain sends a G code in that sense to my muscles, and my muscles can easily get it and pick it up. Now, in the case of somebody who has hypertonic, which means that the muscles are tighter, that means that the steppers have a lot in the G code, have a lot of friction, so they might not reach over there, and so they have to take another pass and more passes, and so the whole process is tiring. Imagine walking and with the stiff stepper motors. I mean, if we have an effective robot, that would be the case. And in a hypertonic situation, the person will just overshoot, and that's not just acting on one axis, it's acting on the entire muscular structure. And in a mixed one, it is even more complicated because some muscles are tighter, some muscles are loose. So that basically affects a lot of gross motor and fine motor skills. And then we have this classification tree where we basically use this similar analogy of having tightness and looseness to what part of the body is. It's like hemiplegia, diplegia, quadriplegia, and then different kinds of ways it affects the muscles. So these are just the physical aspects, but there are secondary aspects as well, like inadequate growth. Because the muscles are tight or loose, the bones are not formed, and that leads to cognitive problems, ADHD, and several other issues. So so that's like us understanding a bit more about what cerebral palsy is. And obviously it's a defect, or it's a birth condition, which is every one birth in 400 in the UK is that's the prevalence rate, and in the global south it is 4 for every 1,000. So there are a lot of therapies that are done, but the problem is the ways therapies are kind of move through the society is very slow. For example, one practitioner would be trained in a certain therapy, and then a new study would come up that says like this therapy is no longer clinically validated because of the way they were trained in. And so what essentially happened, like in the case of my family, they were being treated with some therapies which were actually clinically validated to be not useful. And that's a hard truth. So what I did was I kind of mapped all the therapies that are available, and there is this wonderful systemic paper which maps all the cerebral palsy therapies based on their effectiveness. And so to design our device, we would be focusing more on the therapies which actually work. So then we did a clinical kind of visits to several centers where cerebral palsy is treated, or they offer it as a specialization. And I spent 10 days in each of these places to understand what is their process of teaching parents about therapies so they can do that at homes, and what are the different things they have. And we use techniques like non-participant observation. So the therapist would say like, yeah, this is my new intern, he'll just sit around, he'll not do anything. And my goal was just taking notes on what kind of activities are being performed. And then we figured out that there are some issues in the existing things. Obviously, the biggest problem is the lack of motivation in the patients, because they're not really interested. Like, nobody wants to have pain, and it's like you're 3-year-old and you have to go through a therapy, and it's a lot of pain because they stretch your muscles, they kind of twist you, and so they lack motivation, and the therapists don't have a way to track how the person is performing, whether the person is improving or not. And there's they use a lot of practices which are many times not clinically validated. And again, the whole therapy is repetitive. There's very little social interactions, because the things that these kids use are not used by other kids, and that creates like a social barrier, like, oh, this person is a bit different and I should not engage with the person. And eventually they develop coping mechanisms, so they develop a way to walk in a different way to avoid pain. That leads to more problems, and that leads to a lot of physical and mental exhaustion in the parents themselves, because you can see, like, in 10 days the parents were getting more and more exhausted. So we also follow up this process as you would if you do something similar, is to read a lot of books and watch movies written on similar conditions. So these are two very good books, a book and a movie around the condition of cerebral palsy and what goes around in the minds of these people, because these are written by people who suffer from cerebral palsy. And then you, with all this information, you end up modeling the whole condition. So this is what is called as WHO's ICF, which is International Classification of Functioning. And this is a way which they use to model a disorder or a disease into several parts, like body function, activities, participation, and then contextual factors like personal factors and environmental factors. And this is a widely known model to use, especially like physical, not like articulation and muscle-based diseases. It is used to model those diseases. And then we map this onto cerebral palsy. So what are the main outcomes of this ICF? For example, body functions and structures lead to impairments, activities leads to limitations, and the lack of participation leads to restrictions, and that personal factors and environmental factors are a part of the context. And now the device that we create has to act around all these factors. So this is another, this is called a 5 Fs, like of cerebral palsy. And it's basically based on the ICF. So these are like the 6 F words for cerebral palsy. But I'm talking a lot, and you see that it's like a lot of things. So what we need is now to focus on just one thing, because we cannot solve the whole problem. So what we did was we just focused on one thing, which is fine motor skills, because that apparently affects a lot of day-to-day life, because you cannot eat, you cannot pick things, and the gross motor skills can be managed through or at least intermittently using wheelchairs and assistive movement devices. But the gross ones need usually a third person to help. So the designer enters the scene, and then we do something called as a morphological analysis, which is very common in product design. We use a therapy, and then we break it down into several components of the therapy. For example, bimanual is like you have to move your hand like this, and then that's just one exercise that is a part of the bimanual therapy program. And then we do something which is interesting, is we map it down on the ICF we talked about. Like, hey, does this do fitness? Yes. Does it do function? Yes. But does it do friendship? No. Does it do family? No. Is it fun? No. And so the whole point of our devices or our toys is to introduce these missing Fs into the therapy paradigm. So here are some very rough sketches drawn like a few years ago when So this is like an example of a book which the kids would have, but this is a normal cardboard book that kids have, and then we make a special one for kids with cerebral palsy. And then we make another one which is a module, and this is actually what ended up being this. This is the first prototype. It's just like cardboard and some rubber bands glued to it. And the reason why it was made like this is because it helps me get very easy and fast feedback from the therapist who is just like a few blocks away. So I just go to him, hey, will this work? No, you have to do this. Oh, but this is so dangerous. This will hurt the kids. And so that is how you get feedback. And then this is another device which is like which works on the axis of friendship, because a lot of kids play games with dices, but because of the lack of fine motor control, they cannot handle a dice to play like a game or something. So this is like a version of that, where you have to do an exercise. You have to move your hand like this and then eventually you get a number which of the disc that rotates. And then a common exercise for rehabilitation is also walking. So how about we make that into an interactive game to introduce concepts like fun and friendship? And then what we do expert evaluation, take all of these things to experts and let them rate. And the lowest rating is the one that is usually taken to the next level of improving fidelities. And then we have final concepts, like this is the one of for walking and the stairs. So we built a lot of these things, and then it indicates how you have to step, and the speed keeps increasing, and it is controlled using like a remote control, which will come any moment. So it's like very low tech, very low-fi. You can just increase the volume and then you change the speed. But nobody liked it because they were like, this is super complicated. It needs to do like I have to change my stairs, and then kids will fall down, and then this will break. It needs maintenance. The things that we need to make for in this context has to have almost no maintenance. So I designed the first version, which is called the pinch phone. And the key idea is it has to be a wide spectrum toy. So if there is a person with cerebral palsy playing, another kid who does not have cerebral palsy can also play. So there is a common shared artifact that both people can use. This was like the first version, which was made in wood. It is non-treated, completely additive-free rubber wood, which was not polished at all, and it was just made using CNC. It had this band system which you can change to increase the tension, and lots of shapes, so people can easily use it. It was very hard to build because the CNC outputs are not very like nice, and you have to sand all of them. And the idea is that you have an elastic string and you pull it, and you get different kinds of sounds, but the pulling part is the grips, that are different grips that the kids can be trained on. And this was like the CAD model, and this is the CNC. And then we used a saw blade, and we made these grooves, and then eventually we glued everything together. And this is how it would be used. Basically, you just pull a string, pull a bead, like over here you have several beads. You pull one, and then it makes a sound. And these beads are designed in such a way that they imitate a lot of different kinds of grips. And then we did evaluation. I cannot show pictures of evaluation because I don't have the ethical clearance to show those. But the idea is that we did a pre-test, and then we did a post-test to understand did kids prefer to use this device or not, and did the therapist and the doctors recommended it. And we got almost like a yes from the kids, because they were actually doing just marble picking, and now they have something which makes sound. So they were like, "Yeah, we love this thing." But the problem is I cannot make them by myself, because it needs a lot of time. So what I did was I designed another version which is made in 3D printed plastic, and it can be easily made in any the smallest bamboo lab printer. So it prints in like 3 hours, and it has more grips than before. So there is something called as a coin grip, which is called a lateral pinch, which is over here. So you can pinch it. And then there is a P pinch, which is a pincer grip, which is very important for eating food. And so it has the pincer grip. And then tripod 3-finger grip is over here. So you can use 3 fingers to pinch it. And then the whole device in itself has a palmer grip to keep it so kids can hold it in place as well. And there were several improvements, like there's a sound box which makes the sound better. There is a felt taping inside, so the acoustics are better. And also you can adjust the difficulty levels by pulling the string, because as you pull the string, it gets more tighter and it gets more difficult to use it. And then why is this open source? Because firstly, it can be customized. The parts and everything are open source. Anybody can change them, make new toys for their kids, for their specific purpose, for their specific culture. And the interest in this device in a commercial sense is very niche. Not like Lego would not like to build something like this. And it allows remixes and allow people to study it further. Also, it kind of gives people an idea that these things can be built, and it kind of furthers the epistemological understanding we have. It is easy to repair because anything can be changed, and it is easy to replicate, and also allows me to come to places like this to talk about it. And then we have this thing which is called a topi. Topi is like an Indian word for a hat. So you can actually have different shapes, different colors. So you can have more social participation with people. And you can also think of more things. Like somebody told me an idea like, hey, you can also put like piezos, and then this becomes a MIDI keyboard, and then you can play Unity games, or you can connect it to your phone and it becomes more things. So this is a thing that I really love, because people give more ideas and they kind of project their mindset on this device. And that is, I think, what makes this whole world of open source so beautiful. So I would like to acknowledge people who worked with me on this part. And if you want more information, you can scan this thing. It has more documentation than I can present over here. And thank you very much for your time and attention.
Oh, now we can. Okay. Did we say we're starting with crowd questions first? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, thank you. Lots of interesting projects. Really great to hear. I have a whole bunch of questions, but I'll start with a couple. We had, I think, both Cosmic and Clearwater, both were B Corps, right? How about, okay. I'm just wondering how it works in practice. Like, for example, OpenAI is evolving to a B Corp, and we know how they are. In terms of your investors and others, what is the expectation? Because it's really good that you want to do it open hardware, but the monetization mechanism is seen as being by having proprietary ownership of that output. I know you are in the research phase, or rather only for research authorization. I'm wondering, how do you see it going forward?
What a great question, because I think about that myself a lot. One of the benefits of being set up in the way that we are is that we do not have any outside investment, actually. So at the moment, it's just entirely privately owned, and we don't have to take investment unless we decide that it is going to further the, the goals of the project as a whole. So we've been working off of contracts through Case Western Reserve University, going contract to contract to contract. That has limitations and benefits. One of the questions is, if we are distributing the device to different researchers, will that be a more sustainable business model for us going forward, as opposed to working off of a contract based on a grant, when the grant takes quite a while to fund and with not a huge amount of certainty? Does that answer your question? Like, because we're privately owned, we can say, yes, we don't have to maximize shareholder value.
Does this work as a mic? Oh, it does. Great.
Wow.
Next question.
So our investors definitely want to see a profit. And so we're working through this. I think that as we obtain regulatory clearance, that might be a line where there's an enterprise version of it, because clearly if you change what is regulatory approved, it's not approved anymore. So that is an opportunity to draw a line for enterprise services, support. If a hospital invests in the equipment, then they're going to want it maintained. And so we look at things like that. The other thing that Open Water is doing is we want to encourage people to develop applications on our device. Both devices have a wide range of applications. And so if somebody comes up with an application based on our device, we'd like to partner with them and take that to market as a partner with the developer on the device. So I don't think we have everything figured out, but those are the general lines that we're attempting to achieve.
May I actually follow up on that? So part of this particular strategy about investment versus not investment is very deliberate, actually. A previous iteration of this particular project of Cosmic Ink was used as, I think it was like it created, there was a lot of investment raised for it. Like about 200 people received implants that it's possible that they didn't always need. This was, I think, in the 90s. Is that right, Chris?
There was a company named Neurocontrol that received outside investment. They essentially put all of their money into sales. They implanted a lot of systems, but then didn't have the ability to support them. And so we're hoping that the open source model also applies to not abandoning devices anymore. So that's a power of having the documentation out there. Somebody else will be able to operate it should Cosmic Ink or any academic tie to Cosmic go away in the future. And that it'll be the same with Open Water or MRI or with, I'm sorry, what was the name of the? So the power of the open source is that people will not be abandoned with these things anymore, even if there is an investor collapse or whatever it may be.
So essentially, the model that we've chosen to respond to those particular concerns around ethics and obsolescence is one that is deliberately slow and building piece by piece based on like individual by individual, contract by contract, rather than a more mass market approach.
All right, we got another question over here. I'm talking to the red cube.
Thank you. So I think a couple of speakers mentioned about the health distribution inequality. My question is that why do you need regulatory approval in Europe and America? If you want to serve, I don't know, Global South, you can also start with Cuba or Indonesia, and they don't cost $500 million to give medical approval.
That's very true. I think every country has different regulations, and if you wanted to take a device and go to Cuba or say South America, you're free to do that. And I think that's the other power of the open source model.
Thanks, Mike, for the mic. My name's Andrew with the Internet of Production Alliance. In response to that question, if I may, in my experience, in many developing countries, they default to European, Canadian, American certification. So in my, when I was working in Nepal, like most of the time they try to use Indian certification systems, but then actually, for a lot of international organizations that are working there, it's like, well, if you're not certified in Europe, we're not going to buy from you, which makes it really hard for the local developers in Nepal, who are coming up with all sorts of incredible medical devices, to actually make any sales. I have a really boring question. I'm so sorry, Lukas. Good to see you again, Lukas. I'm curious about your nonprofit, because you've got the startup and you've got a nonprofit. First of all, on the nonprofit side, because I'm in this situation myself with the Open Flexion Microscope team, we're finding it really hard to get insurance, because the conversation is, well, with insurance companies for the NGO, we need liability insurance, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, you're making a medical device that raises red flags. It could be anywhere in the world. And they say, including the US. And we're like, yes, including the US. And they go, oh my God, they've got lawyers there. And it just gets, but you control the manufacturing process. Well, no, not really. Well, who's liable? Do you have any written contracts? No, not quite. Like getting insurance for the NGO that's developing this medical device is proving to be nigh on impossible. How have you found it with your NGO and or your startup?
Yeah. So maybe to clarify, so there is no startup yet. There was some idea to go in this direction, and maybe you have more experience, so we should talk about it. But for now, the idea for the nonprofit is it will not produce any medical devices. So this is just a community tool to keep things going and for this open source core. So Exactly. Yeah. So, but it's a difficult question. Yeah, we don't know yet where we will end. Yeah.
Thank you. Lukas, another question for you. Are you familiar with the open source MRI, low field MRI that was developed and built in the Netherlands with LUMC and TU Delft? Are you in contact with them? Have you used, because theirs is open source, have you reused their design tools, everything?
Yes. So basically, so one of the main developers, so he was with us in the project, and we collaborated over many years, and he is now the founder of one of the companies that I showed. So we will see how things will develop. I believe in the open source heart of people, but I also see other stories. So we will see, and we're still in touch. And
is it Martin van Geysen?
No, this is Tom O'Reilly
From LUMC.
From LUMC, yeah. And we're in touch with Andrew Webb from Leiden. He's in one of the EU projects that we are actually working on this. So we're in close collaboration on different topics.
So is this supposed to be like a next iteration of the one that developed previously, or is it a separate advancement?
Yeah, it's you would really need to go into technical details.
Okay.
So there are a couple of things different with this one now, but yeah, it's we can talk about this.
Sure.
It's really just details. So
Okay.
yeah.
You want it?
Okay, maybe I will ask a question before he manages to ask a question. Actually, I had a question to Scott because I saw, yeah, I think it was on your slides, that you said that your patents are you have patents and everything is open source, and also future patents will be open source. So why do you do patents at all? This was my question.
I think maybe that relates to the lawsuit question. So we share our patents openly. The only thing we say is that you can't sue us. So.
So for us, what we are doing is pursuing a strategy of patent abandonment. There already exist patents, right? We are going from a closed model to an open model. But one of the reasons why we are abandoning the patent is so somebody else cannot, and why it's patented in the first place, is that if somebody else patents it before us, they could make it impossible for us to continue to work on it. So that's why it's like we're going this way rather than not even patenting in the beginning, because it is defensive, yeah.
It's really great to see companies actually tackling that really hard part of regulatory approval in that open hardware space, which I think I haven't seen that really before. And I wanted to ask if you worked on kind of open quality management systems, because that's always kind of a hard part of like building that documentation for regulatory approval. And kind of a second question to that, RTOSs, which are kind of like for especially connected systems, they don't really have the documentation to use them. And then like the whole soup thing comes into play, especially for class 3 devices. That's really hard. So have you worked with any kind of open source RTOSs in that regard to produce documentation, like Zephyr, for example?
The first bit about Open QMS, we've essentially created our own quality management system based off of an open source QMS for medical devices. It was released by OpenMind, and it's on the Open Science Foundation.io, osf.io. So we are able to pull that and kind of make it work for our application. Things haven't progressed as much as for putting out our version of that quality management system to the internet, because there's already a good one out there that we modeled ours after. But still, the quality management system applies mostly to how we're using the device for our clinical trial. As other people start to integrate the open source design and device into their trial or their benchtop work, they're going to have their own QMS. So that's kind of with everything we're doing and the way the FDA is set up for the United States. Essentially, people will still have to prove their own quality management, their own software validation. Yeah, and essentially the researcher and institution will be liable for their study using their device. When it comes to the software, we had to change from a proprietary version of Micrium open source RTOS, or Micrium RTOS, to then their newer version, which luckily didn't prove to be too much of a redevelopment. We got our IDE through at a time when there was not as much scrutiny towards software. And so that is kind of like an area that we need to be looking at more. We've filed to do, we've submitted an application with with OSHA and with another open source medical group, CARS, to work on the cybersecurity aspect and kind of like software validation aspect for open source. I rambled. I'm rambling. Someone else now.
Thanks.
I have a question about one of the comments that Lukas had in his presentation about the return of benefits from companies to the community, and that this is something that needs to be stimulated, and we need to find some creativity on how to do that. What would be the approach in here that you would propose? Is it something that you've been thinking about? Is that something that you've dealt with already? So how to better stimulate the community to give you an incentive for them to contribute to the project and so on.
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, one way is, of course, what I probably said in the talk, is to do it yourself. The other is maybe, and this is probably how we try it within the whole open source imaging efforts, is that when the work in the public space is closely aligned to the products that the companies are doing, then probably this collaboration is the easiest to also contribute back. So just giving like an example from this, so from one part that was out of the project, a research project. So we made a paper out of it. It's this console, and I just learned yesterday actually that then one of these companies is selling this as a product, which is nice, and they are working also in the repositories. But you typically you not always get this information, no? Who's using what and how they benefit. So yeah, I don't know how to. Maybe at some stage through some events, etc., you could map this a little bit better. But I don't know.
We feel like growing the community is very important. Some of the steps we're taking is we'll be releasing simulated versions of our devices so that you don't actually have to build or purchase the hardware and be able to code to it. We've started to have some contests built around coding to different aspects of the device. And so all of these steps are very important, because without the community, then we'd be left to do it all on our own. And that goes very against what our business model is, to get as many different uses going of the device as we can. So
I just want to go back to the question on patents, because I've had quite contradictory conversations with the IP lawyers and others who are interested in it, and people who are community advocates. So the first one, defensive patenting really only works if you have money to patent something, right? And number two, a patent would not be awarded if, for example, prior art exists, right? For example, my university's Innovation Impact Center, when we talked about the presentation yesterday, we said a lot of the times when people apply for patents, one of the things they did is, oh, you've already published all the art, you've never made a intention to actually patent it, and you have like a different legal regimes exist, but so for some, I think in Europe, you have about a year within which you have to patent and things like that. So I guess my question here is, why the defensive patenting strategy as opposed to essentially, considering we're open sourcing it and making it so that the prior art already exists, and therefore nobody else will be able to do it?
Let me restate so I'm sure that I'm following your question. So I think what you're saying is, why do defensive patenting instead of just going towards an open source model? Is that correct?
Those are two different things.
Okay. Well, all right. I'll start from, it's important to realize that COSMIC was funded by the NIH through Case Western Reserve University. And so the patents originally were filed on behalf of the university, and the university has money in order to file them because they have a legal, they have a transfer office. They have the IP, they own the IP. And that's like, that's part of the employment contract for their professors, is that the university owns the IP, right? Yeah. So because Cosmic Inc. is like partially started out of this particular research grant, not funded necessarily by the research grant. Part of our brief, part of our entire goal of being is a way for other people to access the open source technology in order for them to use it and to make sure that other researchers can continue to work, right? We had no option. No. When we are the transfer methodology. Yeah.
So, well, before I answer, one comment on the academic side is, unfortunately now it used to be do your research and publish, and now it's do your research, patent, and then publish, right? So the model has really changed in academia, and the universities are very good about then taking that and trying to license out that technology for commercial use. I think in our case, you know, a lot of the components, especially around the laser and our open motion device, there was just a lot of manufacturing processes and things like that that they felt like we needed to patent, but then we turned around and then pledged to share it with, I think the big motivation for us was the legal aspect. So they patent and then they share it, and with the caveat that you can't sue us. So.
Even certain other licenses, you can essentially have an exception saying, other than malicious intent.
Unfortunately, my background is in neuroscience and I'm not an attorney. So they have people that do better than I do on that.
We are coming up on time. So as a intellectual property lawyer in the room, I will say we're out of time. So please join me in thanking our panel.